So in this video, we are going to pick back up right after the abstract with the first major section of the paper, and that is going to be the introduction. Now, the goal of the authors in the introduction is going to be several different things. One of the main things they're going to do is provide any sort of background information that you're going to need to understand the paper. So if there are terms you need to know, if there are previous studies that need to be summarized, that's all going to take place in the background. This is going to be heavily cited. You're going to find lots and lots of references to other peer-reviewed articles because they're summarizing things that have already been done. The next thing they're going to do is justify the study. They're going to provide what information did they have that led them to do what they did and why is it significant. This is also going to be heavily cited because they're going to be relying on previous information that guided the design of their experiment. The next thing they're going to do is tell you what they did or what the actual goal of their study was. And then in some cases, the paper we're looking at today doesn't do this, but many of them will. They're going to summarize for you what the major finding of the paper was. The nice thing about the format of a scientific paper is that not only do we typically find the same information in every introduction, it's also always present in this particular order. So you can find the background information at the very beginning of the introduction. That is then followed by a justification of the study, which is then followed by what they did in the paper or what the goal of their paper was. And then if that particular piece of information is present, that will be followed by what the major finding was. So you should be able to find the information that you need very easily in your introduction. So let's go back to our introduction and start looking for those things. So I'm going to highlight right here. All of this is the very first part of the introduction, and this is the relevant background information. It's talking about what are called community-acquired infections, which just means the infections we get from going out in public, touching surfaces, bacteria on those surfaces making us sick. That is something that happens and that there's a need to reduce that. The next section is going to start right here, and I'm going to change color so it becomes a little more distinct and obvious from the next section. So right here they're talking about these findings demonstrate the need for proper hygiene protocols and other methods to reduce the potential for community-acquired infections. So now they're getting into the justification for their study. Their study is addressing a potential way to reduce those number of infections. And then that's going to continue on here. And again, let me change the color really quickly. This is going to continue on and be additional justification. Now they're talking about why they specifically used copper in their study. So they're looking at the use of copper in gym equipment, and it's talking here about how copper is known to have antibacterial properties. And then if we keep going on to the next page, so this is the next page of the paper, talking more and more about that. And so we can highlight here. All of this is justifying the use of copper in their study as a method to reduce the amount of bacteria on gym equipment. All right, so if we go quickly back here, what they've done is they've provided background information. They've heavily cited that. They've justified their study, and they've heavily cited that. And I'll just show you what I mean by that. If you look here, every single sentence has a series, one or more references that they're using to associate with that particular piece of information. So all of this statement, they're saying that I can go to references 18 through 23, and I can find the evidence that supports that statement that they're making. In this particular part of the introduction, the background information and the justification, nearly every single sentence will have a citation because what they're doing is summarizing previous research. All right, so now I go back. Notice the very next thing they're going to do, though, is put what they did and what the goal of the paper was. This always comes at the end of the introduction. And if I go back here, this right here and let me just change colors really quickly to make it distinct. This section right here tells you what they did. So the aim of their paper was to determine whether or not copper in gym equipment could reduce the amount of bacteria present compared to non-copper equipment. And then they even have what their hypothesis was. So they're hypothesizing that the copper equipment will have less bacteria than the non-copper equipment. So again, if we go back, what they've done is they've provided background information. They've justified their study. They've told you what they did, what the goal was, what their hypothesis was. And then this paper doesn't do it, but frequently the very last sentence of the introduction tells you what the major finding of the paper was. So we will stop here and we'll pick back up with what you should do after you've read the introduction and you have a sense of the necessary background information and what they're looking to do in this particular study.